This episode is brought to you by Roon. Roon 1.8 is an immersive new music experience featuring a new look, new intelligence, and new features designed for music fanatics. Click the link in the description box below for more information.
Audiophiles are snobs. Yep, they are. I mean, we've all been there, haven't we? We've all taken our sort of first step into a hi-fi store, probably, and then felt very uncomfortable when the proprietor of that store or the salesman has kind of looked down on us, either at our lack of understanding. I mean, like that wonderful Not the 9 o'clock news sketch where the salesman had taken the piss out of the customer because he doesn't know the difference between a tweeter and a woofer. But also we've been made to feel uncomfortable because of our lower budget and the sort of message that we've received from the hi-fi store owner or salesperson is that you're not a proper audiophile until you spend this much or until you own this thing. And it's a condescending, patronizing attitude that completely ignores that our budget, our ability to spend money might be lower than anybody else's or the regular customers of that store might spend. And it completely ignores that, our priorities as a customer might be different to a sort of more spendy audiophile in that store. I mean, we might be into whiskey or into coffee or photography, and we need to leave some of our disposable income to those pursuits, right? So we're not going to spend big on hi-fi, not only because we might not have a large income, but also because we choose not to spend our disposable income in that way. So our sort of patronizing, condescending, snobbish store salesman doesn't see all of these things. And I think when you have more money, it sort of distorts your perception of what it's like to not have a lot of money to spend on hi-fi gear, or to not choose to spend however much disposable income you have on hi-fi gear. And it means also that if you've got a lot of cash to spend on hi-fi, you're less likely to feel the burn of diminishing marginal returns, as somebody, just going into a hi-fi store for the first time will undoubtedly feel. I mean, the market for a $500 integrated amplifier, let's face it, is going to be much larger than the market for a $5,000 integrated amplifier. So yeah, this is just snobbery, out and out snobbery. And I got a definition here that I pulled off the net just earlier on. A snob, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, is someone who has an offensive air of superiority in matters of knowledge or taste. This is what we're talking about here, audiophiles being snobs. But just because they think that way doesn't mean that we have to. But the internet has, in recent years, introduced us to a new kind of snob. And I would call this person the inverted snob. Now, I've got a definition for that as well. This is what I pulled this straight from Google. The inverted snob is someone who has the attitude of seeming to despise anything associated with wealth or social status, while at the same time elevating those things associated with a lack of wealth and social position. So this is like the inversion of being a snob. And we've all been there as well, haven't we? We've all, I guess, been in that position where we've bought something kind of expensive, right? Our first piece of, I guess you'd call really expensive hi-fi gear. And we go onto a forum or a Facebook group and we talk about how happy we are. We're sharing our joy in, our new acquisition, right? And we post a photo maybe and we say how much we love the sound of these speakers or the amplifier or whatever it is. And then somebody wanders into this discussion to tell us that we're an idiot. We're an idiot for spending that kind of money on a pair of loudspeakers. And this attitude of being called an idiot very often comes with a fair dose of hostility, because just behind that "you're an idiot" is "all you need is." And it completely ignores our ability to want to spend that kind of money on loudspeakers and being able to spend that kind of money on loudspeakers. And yeah, choosing to spend our disposable income in a way that we see fit. It completely ignores that. It's the exact inversion of what I was talking about with the hi-fi store salesman. But unfortunately, this kind of inverted snobbery tends to crop up on the internet with sort of regular hi-fi consumers. And this inverted snobbery is often underpinned by a fairly healthy amount of conspiracy theory thinking. That basically manufacturers selling expensive stuff are just tricking us out of our money, right? That a 10 grand speaker is no better than a 5 grand speaker, for example, or let's say a $5,000 integrated amp is no better sounding than a $500 integrated amplifier. And that the makers of the expensive stuff are out to peddle, and this is a word that a term that comes up a lot, they're out to peddle snake oil, right? There's always this sort of the latent accusation of fraud, although it never comes to the surface as explicitly as that. But it's always there, that it's always like suggested, right? So we're an idiot and the manufacturer is essentially, a fraudster. So this is how the inverted snob tends to work out on the internet. I don't see much of this in real life. I tend to see the first kind of normal snob more in real life, but on the net, it's the inverted snob that we tend to see more of. And just because those inverted snobs think that way doesn't mean that we have to. Now, I should be clear here that being poor is no joke. But being poor is not being able to afford to pay your rent, your electricity bill, or buy the groceries that you need to get you through the week. I don't think that being poor is not being able to afford a $3,000 headphone and having to settle for a $300 headphone. I think that's very much a privileged first world problem or position, because nobody ever got sick or was turfed out of their home or lost their job or any of the other major hurdles that come from being poor. Nobody ever suffered these things from having to endure a less expensive piece of hi-fi gear. So when people say, all I can afford is $300, I'm poor, I'm like, no, you're not poor. It's just that either you can't afford the more expensive thing, or you can, but you choose not to spend money in that way. It's an important thing, right? Because as we said before, you might have other hobbies. You might have other pursuits. You might want to spend 5 grand on a new bike frame, for example. And yes, as we mentioned before, diminishing marginal returns are very real, but not being able to afford, like if you genuinely cannot afford a big ticket item, that also distorts your value perception of that big ticket item. A bit like how the normal snob loses sight of the value of a low-cost item. And as the world continues to show us continually, there is a market for this crazy, crazy expensive stuff. There's a market for that because people keep buying it, because they keep seeing value in that stuff. You might not, maybe you don't, maybe you do. But there's also a market for more affordable stuff. There's a market for everything, it would seem, that continues to be sold on an ongoing basis. Obviously, no matter the price point, if something is of very poor value, people will just stop buying it. And then it will just disappear from the market. Because people aren't stupid. People aren't stupid. They know what they're buying. You might not think they do. Or the inverted snob might not think they know what they're buying. But to think that other people who spend more money than us, than you, are stupid is, I think, a very arrogant position to take. Just as the normal snob is also arrogant, patronizing and condescending in thinking that, that poor little newcomer doesn't have a clue about tweeters, woofers, capacitors, DA converters and things like that. It's just the inversion. It's just a complete 180 on that attitude. And no, I'm not asking you to feel sorry for people who can afford things that you cannot afford, or to feel sorry for people who choose to spend more money on hi-fi than you might choose to do. That would be absurd, totally absurd. But what I am asking here is for you, us, to be more tolerant of people and what they choose to spend their money on, right? Remember, it's their money. And I'm talking about this from the snob point of view and the inverted snob point of view. We should be tolerant of people who have the ability to spend more money on hi-fi and choose to do so. And we should be tolerant of people who don't have a lot of money and don't choose to spend a lot of money on hi-fi, right? Because it's their money, their choices. What I'm really getting to here is that I'm suggesting that we see the snob and the inverted snob as essentially intolerant people, right? That whole line of thinking is just built upon an intolerance for others. And intolerance, I think, is a cancer that eats away at all the things that are great about a community of people that share a hobby or a pursuit or a lifestyle, because hi-fi is all of those things. And I think needs to be shown the door whenever it shows up, and people shouldn't stand for it. I think we all need to try harder to adopt a live and let live attitude towards how people choose to spend their money on hi-fi. So yeah, it's kind of heavy stuff, right? But I think it needs to be said. So if you agree with me, even in part, you might not agree with everything I've said. And if that's the case and you want to let me know in the comments, fine, but please be polite. If you agree with some of what I've said, then please consider giving this video a like down below. If you like my attitude towards high-end audio, in that I'm not just some kind of vapid presenter of the new stuff, right? I like to think about these things. I like to think about what goes on out there on the internet or out there in the world when it comes to people who are into hi-fi. It's not just about the gear, it's about the people that are into it as well. So if you dig that, then please consider subscribing to this channel. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching.